is a blessing from the hand of God. It is how God meets us in our suffering. I pray that the scars that have shaped me will inspire and refresh your heart, especially if you are in the midst of hardships or heartaches. So get started, keep listening, and be blessed by the story of Vaneetha Risner. Before you are through, you'll be looking over your shoulder and seeing much more than pain and disappointment. You'll see the unmistakably hard but beautiful stuff God is doing in your own life. Johnny Erickson Tata. Johnny and Friends International Disability Center, Agora Hills, California. Introduction. I almost titled this book, He Makes My Griefs to Sing, because the phrase so beautifully describes what God can do in our suffering. But that could make me sound eloquent and poetic, which I am neither. And furthermore, I can't sing. Just ask anyone who had the privilege of sitting near me in church. So making my griefs to sing isn't pretty. Not because I can't carry a tune and I have no idea what pitch is, but also because the song I sing in my grief doesn't sound winsome. It's often a desperate cry for help, not a stirring hallelujah chorus. But in the end, God has taken my griefs and turned them into something beautiful. He has indeed made my griefs to sing. I am well acquainted with suffering. Many of you listening to this book are as well, and suffering has carved hollows into your soul. Some of you may have even feel abandoned by God as trials have threatened to overwhelm you. I honestly have felt that way too, both as an unbeliever and as a committed Christian. I have been tempted to turn away from Him in my pain, wondering why a good God would let His children suffer. Yet the Lord has proven abundantly faithful as He has filled those hollow places with an overflowing joy. Leaning into Jesus, I have discovered that He alone is my greatest treasure, and walking with Him is my greatest joy. I feel honored to publish this book with Desiring God, especially because the Lord used their ministry to transform my view of suffering. Almost 20 years ago, I heard a John Piper message on the sovereignty of God, and I was immediately convicted about how man-centered and earthly focused my view of life was. For the first time, I became aware of how God uses suffering and trials in the lives of believers for their good and His glory. Since nothing is outside of God's control, I realized that all of my experiences would deepen my eternal joy. The Lord knew that I would need this newfound perspective to sustain me, for suffering would continue to mark every decade of my life. This book was born out of that suffering. My story begins in India, where I was born to Christian parents. As an infant, I contracted polio, long after it was virtually eradicated. Because the doctor had never seen polio before, she misdiagnosed me and prescribed the wrong treatment. Within a day, I was totally paralyzed. The physicians in India offered little hope for my recovery and encouraged my parents to seek better medical care in the West. We quickly moved to London, where I had my first surgery when I was 2 years old. By the time I was 13, I had undergone 21 operations and had moved from England to Canada and finally to the United States. I lived in and out of the hospital for most of my young life and learned to walk, albeit with a pronounced limp, at age 7. Though hospital life was lonely and isolating, I felt safe and normal when I was there. At home, I enjoyed the comfort of a loving family, but was openly picked on at school. Feeling like an outcast, I wanted nothing to do with God because He had allowed all of this to happen. But when I was in high school, God met me in my bitterness, and I committed my life to Him. I went out of state to college and then moved to Boston for my first job. Several years later, in graduate school, I met and married a classmate, and we soon had our first daughter, Katie. After 3 miscarriages, I was pregnant again with a son, whom we discovered would be born with a serious heart defect. Paul had a successful surgery at birth, but when he was 2 months old, he died as a result of a doctor's mistake. It was soon afterwards that I heard John Piper's sermon on God's sovereignty, which radically changed my perspective on suffering. A year later, we had another daughter, Christy, and I busied myself parenting 2 children, teaching a Bible study, and speaking on the comfort of God in the midst of loss. Several years later, I developed an inexplicable pain in my arm and was eventually diagnosed with post-polio syndrome. This disease involves increasing pain and weakness, which could potentially result in quadriplegia.